There's an election with national implications happening in November in Philadelphia for district attorney. The office of district attorney has been scandal-ridden in Philadelphia, which led to the controversial resignation of Democrat Seth Williams. Now, a 21-year veteran of the DA's office, Republican Beth Grossman, you see her there, she will face off against the Democrat Larry Krasner, a defense attorney who represented the Occupy Philly movement and Black Lives Matter. According to the voter registration records, Democrats outweigh Republicans 7-1 in Philadelphia. But here's the reality of all of this. The murder rate in Philly is right up there with Chicago at 22 murders per 100,000 people, and the assault and robbery rate is more than 500 per 100,000. According to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, Philadelphia is one of the most dangerous cities in America. So will this election for a new district attorney there change all of that? Joining me live from New York is Benjamin Mannes, a former federal officer and Washington, D.C. police officer and subject matter expert in public safety and security. Good afternoon, Benjamin.
Hi, how are you doing tonight?
Good, thanks for joining me. I want to talk to you about both of these candidates in this race, but first, this is said to be a crucial election for Republicans, and I want to get your thoughts on the state of affairs in Philadelphia and why it seems that it mirrors what's happening nationally.
Well, the old phrase is all politics are local, and that definitely applies here. Philadelphia has not had Republican leadership with an effective check and a balance since 1952. So when you have Republicans marginalized for that long, Democrats feel as if they could get away with anything they need to do. What that has resulted in is a corruption rate that has surpassed all of the traditionally corrupt cities like Chicago, like New Orleans, to the point where in the last 2 years, 15 public officials have been indicted, charged, and or convicted of corruption charges. So what happened on a national scale was places like George Soros, like the DNC, they're seeing that they're losing in congressional elections, they're losing in senatorial campaigns, and that they lost the presidency to President Trump, and are starting to get into local elections where they could affect the electorate at a local level to the point where a guy like Larry Krasner could get the Democratic nomination in a 7-way primary against some experienced prosecutors and win with help from $1.7 million in George Soros money.
Touch on George Soros again in just a second. So what does the DA's office need in Philadelphia? Beth Grossman, the Republican, is taking on Larry Krasner, someone, as you mentioned, receiving funds from celebrities, Susan Sarandon, John Legend, and billionaire George Soros. So your take on his attempt to put his thumb on the scale?
Well, first things first, Philadelphia does not need a second public defender. Philadelphia has the highest crime rate of any city over 1 million people nationally. Chicago's getting a lot of population because of its murder surge, but Philly has steadily been higher than any of the cities populated similarly in the nation. So what we need is an experienced prosecutor who understands that they're the advocate for the victim. As the prosecutor, when that crime has been arrested by the police, that criminal is in custody, the prosecutor needs to serve the victim and make sure that person isn't out on the street to victimize again. So while our hearts go out to people who are, suffering with addiction, for people who are in an unwinnable economic situation, it does not help to simply not charge people with crimes and open up the jail cells. So what Philly needs is an experienced prosecutor who understands the role of the prosecutor and does the job accordingly. What we don't need is someone who doesn't understand the job and is learning on the job in a city with that much crime, because unlike certain other legislative offices, this is a life and death gig. People cannot afford to have criminals on their street, especially when there are so many already in that city. As far as Soros, I'm sure folks like Soros and the folks out protesting believe in what they're protesting for, but everything they're protesting for, everything they believe in, is statistically not valid. You can't affect policy to this level where you're putting in a guy that has sued the police 75 times and never prosecuted a criminal, putting $1.7 million in his bank in a city where anyone opposing him is going to have a 7-to-1 voter disadvantage, and with a $3,000 cap on individual contributions, will never catch up to the point where they could get on TV in such a valuable media market. So basically, Soros is tipping the scale. He feels that he could get progressives in key seats like the prosecutors and district attorneys so that he could affect public policy on a local level and therefore forward his radical agenda.
Benjamin, we touched on this earlier in the hour. The DOJ says that some cities simply are not holding up their end of the bargain when it comes to enforcing federal immigration laws. Some states, California, and some cities, Philadelphia is one of those. Your take on that? Yep,
look, the federal government, first things first, the Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement is being demonized for their work on the immigration side of the house. And for anyone who remembers the birth of the Department of Homeland Security, the Immigration and Naturalization Service agents and the customs agents merged to create ICE. So the work that they're doing in child pornography, human trafficking, smuggling, is being marginalized because everyone doesn't want to cooperate with the agency on immigration basis. But let's look at this on a bigger scale. Fentanyl, which is made in China and smuggled through the Mexican border from gangs like MS-13, is hitting the streets largely with the help of illegal immigrants. So not enforcing that crime on a grand scale is not going to help public safety in the communities, and we're already seeing signs of marginalization on the public safety front in Philadelphia, because since there's been such acrimony between Mayor Jim Kenney and the federal government in regards to complying with ICE detainer orders, the great number of federal officials at the fusion centers and on task forces have pulled out, leaving Philadelphia undermanned to handle large federal crimes occurring on their streets, where they would be getting task force assistance if they just got along on a policy level. So I think there's a great deal of work to be done. I think we have to, in law enforcement especially, put politics aside and look at what the book says. If immigration, trafficking, and related offenses are crimes, we have to honor those charged with enforcing those federal crimes and at least extend the federal professional courtesy we would with any law enforcement agency, state or local.
And Benjamin, one last thing here. Let's get back to this race, and we'll finish with this. Criminal justice is a national issue. We've been talking about that, one that President Trump has continued to focus on and have success with, for instance, MS-13 gang members. Beth Grossman, no doubt, could ride that wave of success. Your thoughts on the influence that the president could be having on this election?
Well, Beth Grossman has 21 years experience in the district attorney's office, so she's worked cross-jurisdictional and cross-designated cases. But when you think about what the federal government could do with a local prosecutor's office that actually welcomes them in, which is something they would do if they were not fearing corruption charges, like our previous district attorney was in Philadelphia, who's now in federal custody for corruption charges, guess what happens? You could cross-designate the local prosecutors, district attorneys, for things like gun crimes and Brady violations, for things where they could be helping bring people in for federal crimes where they do longer time versus the revolving door of justice that occurs on the local level. So we're ready and willing, if Beth Grossman was to win this campaign against radical Larry Krasner, we'd be more than willing to work with the federal government and extend any law enforcement assistance that they would be willing to help with.
Oh, okay, Ben. Thanks so much. That, of course, that November election coming up for Philadelphia's the next DA in Philadelphia, a vital position. Ben, thank you so much for joining us live from New York.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.